Princess of Wales pledged herself to serve her country and her people, and to maintain the precious principles of constitutional government which lie at the heart of our nation.
The order was devastatingly simple, but its meaning could not have been more brutal. King Charles had made a decision that would redraw the emotional boundaries of his own household. Camilla was to lose unrestricted access to Balmoral Castle, while Princess Catherine would receive full authorization to use the Scottish royal residence. No ceremony announced it. No balcony appearance softened it. Just one royal instruction, and one door that suddenly belonged to someone else. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat alone after signing the order, the pen left beside the page as though he needed distance from what he had done. Balmoral was not simply another royal property. It was the monarch's Scottish home, tied to Queen Elizabeth II, family summers, grief, and memories no public ceremony could replace. An aide asked whether Camilla should be summoned. The king refused. He wanted the decision to reach her in writing first. Camilla read the instruction twice. She lowered it onto the table, looked at the aide, and asked whether Charles had signed it personally. When the answer came back yes, she did not argue. She did not demand an explanation. The queen consort understood what unrestricted access meant. She had enjoyed it for years. The freedom to arrive as family, not as a guest waiting for approval. Now that freedom was gone. Catherine received different news, but there was no victory in her reaction. The princess was being granted full residential and private family access, including authority over schedules, family arrangements, and designated rooms used during future gatherings. In plain terms, Charles was trusting her with more than permission to stay. He was handing her influence over how Balmoral would function inside the family circle. She understood the honor, but the cost. The most painful clause sat inside the order. Camilla could still attend family occasions when invited, but any entry outside those arrangements would require approval through the king's household. A place she had entered beside her husband could now become somewhere permission was refused. That distinction turned a private instruction into something deeply personal. Charles knew the decision would look sudden, yet nothing about it had begun that morning. A private disagreement involving Catherine, Camilla, and one Balmoral tradition connected to Elizabeth had already pushed the household toward breaking point. The signed order was only the consequence. The real rupture had happened earlier, and before that confrontation can be understood, one question matters most. Why did Balmoral mean so much to all three of them that a single closed door could wound the family this deeply? Balmoral was never merely stone, land, and locked gates. To Charles, it carried memories of his mother. To Camilla, it represented acceptance into the innermost circle of royal life. And to Catherine, it had slowly become a place where the future of the monarchy felt almost tangible. That was why the king's order cut so deeply. He had not redistributed rooms. He had redistributed belonging, and every person involved understood the difference. Charles felt that difference more sharply than anyone. Balmoral carried childhood summers, private family conversations, and the final years of Queen Elizabeth II, when the estate had become almost inseparable from her image. It was privately owned by the monarch, meaning it belonged personally to the sovereign, rather than being held as part of the official crown estate. That made every decision about access feel less ceremonial and far more intimate. To him, the house was supposed to remain protected from rivalry. Camilla had once believed her place there proved something important. After years of public hostility and private resistance, unrestricted entry had felt like acceptance at the deepest level. She was not simply accompanying Charles. She belonged beside him. Now that certainty had been damaged. The queen consort could still hold rank, attend ceremonies, and stand beside the king. Yet one private restriction had reopened the fear that belonging could still be withdrawn when trust changed. Catherine carried a different burden. Years of visits with William and their children had slowly tied her to Balmoral's future rather than its past. She had learned the rhythms of family gatherings, the importance of privacy, and the quiet rules Charles valued there. The princess understood that none of those responsibilities were glamorous. They were about continuity, restraint, and protecting a family space from becoming another arena for status. Catherine folded her hands when she finally spoke to William in private. She admitted that the new access made her uncomfortable because she did not want Balmoral turned into evidence of Camilla's humiliation. William chose his words carefully. He told her refusing the king's decision could create a deeper fracture, because Charles had not made the transfer casually. The prince understood that his father was assigning trust, not handing out rewards. Charles had already been moving in that direction for months. A senior household record showed that Catherine's responsibilities around family scheduling and private arrangements had quietly increased, long before Camilla understood how much influence was shifting. The monarch had watched how she handled sensitive moments without making them about herself, and that restraint mattered to him. But those quiet changes alone would never have produced a ban. Something far more personal happened during one private Balmoral gathering. It involved Catherine, Camilla, and a room still closely associated with Elizabeth. And once that door became the center of an argument, Charles's patience changed into resolve. Every royal rupture has a moment that later feels inevitable. And at Balmoral, that moment came behind a closed door. It happened during a private family weekend, when Camilla challenged a tradition Catherine had been asked to preserve on Charles's behalf. What began as a disagreement over access to one room became something far more dangerous. A confrontation over memory, authority, and who had the right to shape the monarchy after Queen Elizabeth was gone. Charles had trusted Catherine with the preparations because he wanted the gathering kept intimate. Several small customs connected to his mother's summers at Balmoral were to remain untouched, and one upstairs sitting room carried special weight. The space had been preserved largely as Elizabeth had known it, used for quiet family moments rather than entertaining. To the king, keeping it that way was not about decoration. It was an act of loyalty to memory. Camilla reached the door during the gathering and told staff to open the room for an informal reception. Catherine stepped in quietly before anyone moved. She reminded her that Charles had specifically asked for the room to remain closed. The queen consort stopped, looked at her, and answered that she did not need Catherine's permission inside the king's home. The words were controlled, but the message was unmistakable. Catherine felt the humiliation immediately, yet she refused to turn the moment into a public argument. She stepped back, allowed the conversation to end, and carried the discomfort with her until she could speak to Charles privately. When she later gave him a direct account of what had happened, she did not exaggerate it. She simply repeated the exchange and explained that she had tried to follow his instruction. Charles took the restraint harder than anger. He had expected resistance to changes around Balmoral, but he had not expected a request tied so closely to Elizabeth to be challenged in front of staff. The king then learned that the disagreement had gone further. Camilla had also questioned why Catherine was being given increasing influence over family arrangements, and described the shift as unnecessary. That detail changed everything. Charles no longer saw the incident as tension between two women. He saw it as a challenge to his authority, and to a memory he had deliberately protected. Catherine had been asked to preserve the boundary. Camilla had chosen to test it. The king did not confront her that night. He waited. Days later, he summoned Camilla privately, and this time, there would be no staff, no family gathering, and no closed room to argue over. What happened next was not a palace memo or whispered instruction, but a direct confrontation between husband and wife with nowhere left for either of them to hide. There were no courtiers standing between them when Charles finally confronted Camilla. No advisors could translate his anger into polite royal language, and no ceremonial title could protect either of them from what needed to be said. Behind the closed door, Balmoral became the symbol of a deeper argument. Camilla believed Catherine was being elevated at her expense. Charles believed his wife had ignored a boundary tied directly to his mother, and that difference was impossible to disguise. Charles had asked for the meeting after they returned from Scotland, and he made sure no aides were present. He did not want a formal palace process or an official reprimand. He wanted a husband and wife conversation about something that had become painfully personal. The king told her that Catherine's growing responsibilities at Balmoral came directly from him and were meant to prepare the next generation to care for the estate, not reduce Camilla's public place beside him. Camilla heard the explanation, but it did not soften the wound. She told him the pattern felt deliberate. Catherine was receiving more trust, more access, more responsibility, and increasing closeness to traditions she herself had spent years learning to respect. The queen consort reminded him how long it had taken for her to feel accepted inside the family, and now she felt that acceptance being quietly narrowed. Charles did not raise his voice. He told her trust could not be measured by title alone. When Camilla answered that she had only been protecting her position, he pushed back immediately. Balmoral, he said, was never supposed to become a place where anyone needed to defend position. It was meant to remain one of the few spaces where family mattered more than rank. The tension deepened when Charles revealed that the sitting room dispute was not the first warning. Several smaller complaints about access, scheduling, and household arrangements had already reached him. The king had ignored some of them, hoping the friction would settle. Instead, the confrontation over Elizabeth's protected room became the final trigger. Camilla then noticed the folder beside him. Her expression changed before she even asked the question. "Did Catherine ask you to do this?" Charles paused, then answered that she had not. The decision was entirely his. He closed the folder between them, making it clear that the restriction had already been prepared. Camilla felt the betrayal land in silence. Charles looked exhausted rather than triumphant. Neither apologized, and neither moved toward reconciliation. When the king left the room, the order was still standing. And once the emotion was stripped away, the paperwork revealed something even more dramatic. The king had transferred not just access, but real control. The most shocking part of Charles's decision was hidden in the details. Catherine had not merely been given another bedroom key, or permission to spend longer summers in Scotland. The king's instruction placed her at the center of Balmoral's private family operation, allowing her to shape who stayed, how future gatherings were organized, and which traditions were protected. The symbolism was unmistakable. Charles was trusting the future princess-turned-queen with something intensely personal. Charles understood exactly why the arrangement carried such weight. Balmoral was privately owned by the monarch, rather than held through the crown estate, which is the property portfolio tied to the institution rather than the sovereign personally. That distinction gave him wider control over who could use the residence and how family access was managed. This was not ceremonial authority. It was personal discretion, and the king had chosen to exercise it. Catherine learned just how much had changed when Charles handed her the authorization file. She did not open it immediately. Instead, she looked at him and asked whether he was certain. The monarch answered with one quiet word: completely. Her new privileges included unrestricted family access, consultation over private schedules, protected time for William and their children, and direct coordination with senior household staff during designated stays. Catherine felt the responsibility before she felt any sense of advantage. She told Charles privately that she feared the transfer would look like a victory over Camilla. He stopped that idea immediately. The arrangement was not a prize, he told her, and she must never allow anyone to treat it as one. The king wanted stewardship, not celebration. William understood the danger too. He supported Catherine, but he warned her that even a small gesture could be interpreted as triumph. The prince knew the family was already carrying enough tension, and he did not want her new authority turned into another public comparison with Camilla. Catherine agreed. She wanted the responsibility without the spectacle. Charles had gone even further than either of them first realized. He gave Catherine custodial influence over several family traditions connected to Elizabeth, effectively making her one of the principal guardians of Balmoral's private culture as it moved toward the next reign. That trust placed her closer to the future William would eventually inherit. Camilla's position, however, was clearly separated from Catherine's. She could still attend selected family occasions when invited, but automatic independent access was gone, and that distinction would soon stop being theoretical. A planned visit was about to collide with the new rules, forcing Camilla to discover exactly where Charles had drawn the line. The order became real for Camilla, not inside a palace office, but when she attempted to make arrangements for Balmoral, as she had done before. The answer came back differently this time. Her preferred dates could not simply be entered into the household schedule. Approval was required. Catherine's family period had already been protected. In one cold administrative exchange, the Queen Consort discovered the true meaning of Charles's decision. Balmoral was no longer somewhere she could assume would open for her. Camilla had expected the request to be routine. Her office contacted the Balmoral household about a private stay, but the response was careful and firm. The dates she wanted had already been reserved for Catherine, William, and their children under the new family arrangement. Any separate visit now had to pass through Charles's household for approval. What once happened automatically had become something she needed permission to request. Camilla read the message alone. She placed her glasses beside the correspondence and told the aide waiting nearby to leave without preparing a reply. The anger came first, sharp and immediate, but it did not last. Something heavier replaced it. The Queen Consort was not simply being told that a schedule was full. She was being forced to feel the boundary Charles had created, inside a place that once represented complete acceptance. Charles spoke to her later, and the silence between them carried more weight than the argument before it. Camilla did not challenge him this time. She simply said that she now understood what the order really meant. The king did not deny it, soften it, or suggest the arrangement might change. His silence became the answer. The restriction was staying. Catherine learned about the scheduling conflict soon afterward and felt the discomfort deepen. She offered to move her own family dates, hoping to remove some of the humiliation without challenging Charles directly. He refused. The monarch told her that changing the arrangement would weaken the very boundary he had intentionally put in place. Catherine was not responsible for protecting Camilla from a decision she had not made. That refusal revealed something important. Catherine's access was not temporary damage control after one argument. Charles expected the household to treat it as a lasting change. William understood that too, and he urged his wife not to carry guilt for an order that came from the king himself. Catherine still could not ignore the human cost. The more authority she received, the more uncomfortable she became with what Camilla had lost. That discomfort would lead to the story's most unexpected moment. Not another royal order, but a quiet, private meeting between the two women at the center of the fracture. Catherine could have remained silent. Charles had made the decision. William supported her, and Balmoral was now open to her without restriction. But power carried its own danger, and she understood that accepting it without acknowledging Camilla's humiliation could turn a royal boundary into a permanent personal war. So Catherine asked for one private meeting. No advisors, no husbands, no palace machinery. Just two women sitting across from each other, with Balmoral between them. Catherine entered the conversation, determined to keep one thing clear. Charles's decision was his alone. She had asked to speak privately because she did not want their personal relationship buried beneath palace rank or household procedure. Neither the king nor William was present, which meant there was no one to soften the words, redirect the tension, or turn the exchange into something official. For once, both women had to speak without institutional protection. Catherine told Camilla directly that she had never asked for her access to be restricted. She also made clear that Balmoral would never become a symbol of victory for her. "I didn't ask for your door to close," she said quietly. The queen consort looked away for several seconds before answering that the door had never really been Catherine's to close. The response was cold, but underneath it sat something more fragile. Camilla finally admitted what had hurt most. It was not the rooms, the schedules, or even the need for permission. It was realizing that Charles believed someone else could be trusted at Balmoral more completely than she could. That recognition had cut through years of hard-won acceptance. The queen consort had fought to belong beside him, and now one private decision had exposed a limit she never expected to face. Catherine did not defend herself. Instead, she revealed that after the scheduling conflict, she had offered to move her own family dates. Charles had refused. The princess explained that he believed changing the arrangement would weaken a boundary he had set personally. That detail mattered. It showed Camilla that Catherine was not secretly directing the outcome from behind the scenes. Camilla's anger did not disappear, but it changed direction. She could no longer place the full weight of the humiliation on Catherine. The deeper wound now sat between herself and Charles, where it had always belonged. Their conversation restored no privileges and erased no pain, but it stopped the fracture from becoming a private war between two women. And just as that understanding settled between them, the secret escaped beyond palace walls, and Britain woke to a Balmoral story powerful enough to turn one family decision into a national symbol. By the time the Balmoral decision reached the public, the palace had already lived through its most painful moments. Britain had not. Suddenly, Charles's private boundary became a national argument about Camilla's standing, Catherine's future, and whether the monarchy was quietly reorganizing itself around the next generation. One headline transformed the story from household tension into royal symbolism, and one image outside Balmoral captured exactly how quickly private pain could become public judgment. Camilla saw the front page at breakfast. A photograph of Balmoral's gates dominated the page beneath the headline, "One Castle, Two Queens in Waiting." She read it once, turned the newspaper face down, and continued eating without comment. The queen consort had already begun processing the restriction privately, but public comparison made the wound sharper. Now strangers were debating whether she had been replaced inside the king's own family. Catherine reacted with a different kind of frustration. She had accepted the responsibility reluctantly, yet the coverage presented her as the winner of a royal contest she had never wanted to enter. The princess instructed her household not to brief against Camilla, and not to celebrate the access transfer in any way. Her concern was simple. If the story became a battle between two women, Charles's original decision would be buried beneath spectacle. The public argument split quickly. Some saw the king's move as punishment, a clear sign that Camilla's private influence had weakened. Others viewed it as preparation for William and Catherine, the couple expected to carry the monarchy into its next chapter. Palace staff offered no detailed explanation of the access rules, and that silence allowed the symbolism to grow far beyond the private scheduling decision that started it. Outside Balmoral, the story became tangible. Visitors gathered near the gates, while television crews broadcast live, discussing who could enter freely and who now required permission. The closed entrance became a simple public symbol of a much more complicated family fracture. Charles had tried to draw a private boundary, but Britain had turned that boundary into a national verdict. Camilla felt exposed by the spectacle. Catherine felt trapped by it. Neither woman wanted the decision reduced to victory and defeat, yet the story had already taken on a life of its own. Charles understood that silence could no longer control the meaning of what he had done. The king began preparing one final family conversation, not to reverse the order, but to define it. The public had chosen its symbolism, but Charles still had one final responsibility: to tell his family what Balmoral would represent from that moment forward. In the end, Charles refused to let Balmoral become a trophy for Catherine, or a monument to Camilla's humiliation. He gathered the people closest to the decision and made his position unmistakable. The restriction would remain. Catherine's access would remain. But neither change, he insisted, was meant to erase a marriage or crown a successor before her time. Balmoral had become the place where the king finally drew a boundary between personal loyalty, inherited memory, and the future he believed the monarchy required. Charles spoke without anger because the argument had already cost enough. He confirmed that Catherine's authority at Balmoral was not temporary and would remain part of the family arrangements he had established for William and their children. The king wanted continuity, not revenge. Camilla would still be welcome at specific family occasions when invited, but the old assumption of unrestricted independent access was over. That distinction was painful, yet deliberate. Camilla heard the decision without interrupting. Charles told her that none of it erased what she meant to him as his wife, but he would not pretend the disagreement at Balmoral had left trust untouched. The queen consort understood the difference at last. Affection could remain while authority changed. Their marriage had survived enormous pressure before, but survival did not mean every privilege stayed exactly where it had once been. Catherine accepted the responsibility with equal restraint. She told Charles she would protect Balmoral's traditions without treating them as possessions or symbols of status. The princess understood that stewardship meant carrying something forward for the family, not claiming it for herself. The monarch had trusted her with more than access. He had trusted her with the emotional culture of a place tied deeply to Elizabeth, and eventually, to William's future reign. Charles closed the Balmoral file at the end of the family discussion. He told Catherine to keep the estate a family home before anything else. Camilla heard the words, understood their meaning, and did not challenge them. The silence was no longer defiance. It was acceptance. Balmoral had not become Catherine's because Camilla disappeared from royal life, and one closed door had not erased everything Charles and his wife had survived together. What changed was more precise and more permanent. Trust had been redrawn. Responsibility had shifted. Catherine carried greater authority but also greater burden, while Camilla remained beside the king, knowing some parts of royal family life were now moving toward the next generation. The gates of Balmoral remained exactly where they had always stood, but after Charles's decision, everyone inside the royal family understood that who could cross them, and what that privilege represented, had changed forever. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.